All right, so now we're going to move into Unit 1, and it's less about how do you pick a topic and more about what do you do with that topic. What are those traditional literacy skills that you might use to apply it? So what I want you to do is you're going to preview the lessons in Unit 1B. So if you go up to that digital literacy page that you had open before, remember that toggle switch that we selected 1A launch on? Up towards the top, you're going to hit the down arrow and go to 1B. So you're going to look at the rest of the Unit 1. We're still in first quarter lessons. While you're looking at those lessons, I want you to think about the kids that you taught this year, if you taught Reading 6 this year or something similar to that. When you're looking at the lessons, think about, oh, if I had a similar kind of class, where would I need to spend more time? Where might I need to spend less time? How would I tweak this lesson to be appropriate for my student population? You don't know who your kids are yet. You can't really make those decisions, but you can begin to start that kind of planning process in your head because it's not a day-by-day lesson, right? There's plenty of time for you to create your own lesson seeds to put in there, and we'll have some time this afternoon to do that. So we're taking a few minutes. We're looking at Unit 1B, and we are going through the lessons and just seeing what's there and familiarizing ourselves with those, okay? Okay, let's go over the lessons together as a group a little bit. There is more time to plan in the afternoon, and you can spend more time looking through the lessons. So lesson 1 is about credibility of sources. And I know that I said that kids are coming from Curriculum 2.0, and they've had a lot of experience with that, and they have. But it doesn't matter how smart the kid is, how advanced they are as readers, or whatever. It is not something we can take for granted that they know how to determine credibility of sources. So I will share with you my personal story that led to part of one of those lessons. My son, my eldest son, who's now 21, yeah, I had him at birth. Saw the documentary on mermaids that was on the Discovery Channel. Have you seen it? Body of Evidence, something, something, I forget what it is. And totally honestly, fully believed that mermaids existed. And why not? It's on the Discovery Channel, right? Everything you see there is documented, credible source, right? So then my middle son, who's now 20, looked at it, watched the movie, totally believed it. My husband, who is the brightest man I have ever met, watched the movie, totally believed it. My youngest son, who's now 18, totally believed it. And these are kids who are in AP classes, who have grade point averages of like 4.11, okay? Like bright kids in college level courses, in high school, totally believed it. So this says to me that we need to be better about teaching the critical consumer. So just because it's coming from a source that you would typically associate, have you done your research on that particular source? You were, the people who were sitting here were mentioning how gifted the girl was in that article. Yeah, nobody teaches that kid. I have never taught that kid, no matter what school system I'm in. That's great, but But one of the things she did is when she went to a website, she went to the About Us section of the website and looked to see who was sponsoring that website. I've never done that as an adult. Okay, so these are skills we need to teach kids. I gave the example yesterday of the study that said that dark chocolate was healthy for you. Love that study. Happy that they came out with that. And you know who sponsored it? Nestle, yeah. So you really need to look, you have to be critical consumers of information. So even if you believe the information, even if the information is believable, what they're choosing to put in and what they're choosing to leave out is part of that critical process. So we need to demonstrate that to kids. The tree octopus lesson in there, some of the media specialists felt like that they might have seen that already. I have not come across a class that has seen that already, but you may. Right? So you may. So that's why there's a couple different options there, and there's certainly other options you could use. That dog website, I don't think many people have seen, that kind of thing. But the tree octopus was created by a college professor. A college professor. 89% of his kids believed that the tree octopus was a real animal. An octopus cannot live in a tree. Do you know what I mean? Just because it's on the internet doesn't make it real. So we really need to teach the kids to ask the questions so that when they're coming up with biased and slanted information, they can choose what is appropriate and disregard what is inappropriate. So that's what that lesson's about. Again, really planning with your library media specialist. So for example, did I hear you were coming from 5th grade? 4th grade. So at your school, you did something with the tree octopus. So the schools that you would feed into may not want to do anything around the tree octopus because those kids have already been exposed to it. So pick a different one. Okay. The second lesson is central idea. How do you infer the central idea of something? Now, central idea is something you do from way back, 1st grade even, right? But determining the central idea is a skill that you need all the way up through. It's just how complex is the text that you're trying to address. So determining the central idea of a 1st grade text is a lot different than determining the central idea of my insurance documents, which are outrageously obscene. I have no idea what they're trying to communicate. Do you know what I mean? So it really depends on text complexity in terms of what the kid is able to access. So we're really trying to model the process of how one comes up with the main idea, not can you determine the main idea of article X, because I don't care, you're never going to come across article X again, but how do you learn that process so you can apply it to different scenarios? Did I see a hand up over here? Okay, just the voices in my head. Lesson 3 is around reciprocal reading, and then we had a conversation over here earlier about like what do you have when kids are struggling with the level of the text that they're reading. And reciprocal reading is really about helping kids to self-monitor their comprehension and work together to make meaning of something that they're going to come across. Because that's the hardest skill. Even for our most advanced readers, they are going to come across a document that is too hard for them. They are. It's part of life, right? And for some people, that doesn't happen until college, and then they smack into a brick wall because they've never learned how to access that. And for some kids, it happened way a long time ago, and they've been struggling their whole life and everywhere in between. So we really want to help them learn those metacognitive processes. How are you monitoring what you understand or what you don't understand? Or is the kid just going, I don't get any of it, and shutting down? Because we see that sometimes, too. So that one is about making meaning, and it starts with a piece of abstract art. Because text comes in all different shapes and sizes. So how do you get kids to make meaning from any type of text? And how do they monitor that? Lesson 4 is on relevant evidence. A lot of times when I was teaching writing, I would get essentially these massive copy and paste sessions, right? Anything around it, it doesn't matter if it relates or not. Let's say we were talking about bullying. Any article that had anything to do with bullying or even mentions bullying, they're going to copy and dump it in there and then hope something hits the mark, right? It's the grape shot method, like something's got to hit, right? But that's not what we're talking about. That's not what we want. We want them to really determine what's relevant and what's irrelevant. And so there's a rubric in there to help them with not only determining what's relevant from what's irrelevant by setting a purpose for their reading through their driving question, but then how are they explaining its relevance? You can't just plop it in there. You have to tell me how that relates back to your driving question. I can't read your mind. So that's what that lesson's about. Hopefully it will cut down on that whole brain dump philosophy. And it is one of the skills that Marzano puts out as one of the most important for success in college, the ability to determine relevance from irrelevance. We do it all the time as fluent readers, as adults, but sometimes we don't model how we do that because it's so second nature for us. So it's really, you know, it's like doing think-alouds and things like that that the kids need, so they learn that. Lesson 5 is on plagiarism. We have a lot of apps and things like that that will create works cited pages for them. I'm not so much worried about the format of that. What I'm worried about is, do they know what it means to give credit to your sources in terms of direct quotes, in terms of paraphrasing, and in terms of summaries? Because sometimes they'll say things like, well, I changed these words. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's intentional cutting of corners, and sometimes it's not. And we really need to teach the thought process behind it. So the example in there is of the photograph of Obama, right? And that's not plagiarism, I understand. It's copyright infringement. If you read the consider section, it points that out. But the photograph that was used for that Hope poster that you saw in his campaigns, the red, white, and blue Hope poster, the author of the original photograph that was based on was never given credit, and he sued. Do you know what I mean? So even if you change the words, you make it a drawing and you make pretty colors on it, whatever, you use somebody else's creative thought and you have to give them credit. So that's what the tie-in is there. It's really helping them think through the idea of intellectual property kind of idea. Not those words, but the same concept. Lesson 6 is really about how do you take your notes, your Cornell notes probably, and make them into writing. So you have all these notes. How are you going to take them off of that and make them into some type of writing? And then lesson 7 goes back to that in terms of revision. So you want to make sure that all of the details that are in there, all the evidence is in there is concise, it's related, all those things we just talked about with the relevance piece. Okay? So that's kind of the foundation of Unit 1. So you saw the launch, which is 1A, and then you saw the lessons for 1B, which is the rest of Unit 1. Questions you had about Unit 1. And we're going to talk a little bit about assessment and grading, because that came up in a couple of groups. We're going to talk a little bit about that right after lunch. But are there any questions about the lessons themselves?
I do. So I said this a little bit. I'm used to teaching math a lot,
okay.
So it's more where you get a lesson and then you teach it that day and then you keep going. Is there like a recommended time frame that these lessons should take? It just kind of depends on how far your students get.
So the sample lessons that are in there are meant to take 45-minute block.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that they've mastered the standard, and they won't in a day. So you're really going to have to use that formative data that's part of every lesson to say, do I need more time there or not? But it's not a day 1 you do this, a day 2. Like math is much more regimented. So it's really going to depend on your kids. And obviously the things like how do you take your notes from your Cornell notes and make them into a piece of writing, that's going to take a lot longer than how do you define vocabulary in context. So it's where your kids are and then the content itself. But hopefully there's collaborative planning going on in your schools. If you're a singleton, get on the collaboration site with one another and share ideas where you are, that kind of thing. And then share lessons that you're creating so that you're not recreating the wheel, especially if you're a singleton. Sorry, I wish I had something more specific, but it doesn't work like that. It's really about the process. Okay, more questions will come up, and that's great. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle, who's going to help us through with some of the apps that are referenced in the units.